Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for spending your hour with us today for our special Wednesday webinar series. My name is Alice Fox, and I'm the Director of Talent Delivery at Talent Connections. When you get a chance, we do have the chat feature available. So when you get a chance, make sure to say hello in the chat box and tell us where you're coming from today. Our last Wednesday webinar in November, we actually had someone who was from Turkey. So that's the farthest we have had away. So that's exciting for us as well that we've gone international. But a few housekeeping items that you for today is this is a 1 hour recorded webinar. If you have any questions, please make sure to email me at alicefox@talentconnections.net. All participants are muted, but as I mentioned, we do have the chat function available. There is question and answer function available. So please be aware that we do have questions throughout. We do have times that you'll be able to jump in, and please feel free to ask any questions that you have, and we will be sure to answer them once we get to a stopping place. And E and I will definitely make sure that we monitor that. This webinar is approved for one SHRM Professional Development credit, and that activity code will be given at the conclusion of the webinar. Today, I am pleased to introduce Ian Ziskin. He is the president of Exec Excel Group and a trusted advisor with more than 43 years of experience as a business leader, CHRO, board member, coach, consultant, and author. His work spans over 25 industries and includes advising CEOs, senior executives, HR leaders, and boards. He co-founded the Consortium for Change and the CREATE project on the future of work in HR. Ian previously spent 28 years in senior leadership and CHR roles with Northrop Grumman, Quest Communications, and TRW. He has served on numerous boards and advisory groups across the HR, technology, and leadership space, and teaches leadership and HR as an adjunct professor at Binghamton University. Ian is the author or co-editor of 5 books and many articles on HR, leadership, and the future of work. Ian holds degrees from Cornell University and Binghamton University and is a fellow of the National Academy of Human Resources, widely recognized as one of the leading thinkers in the HR profession. We are so thankful and appreciative of Ian being on our webinar today. This topic, I had yesterday was thinking about this, and I know Ian and I have talked about this as well, that we're definitely kind of in that sandwich group where we've had parents that are aging or have passed away. And then of course we have our children, some that were empty nest and are out and about, but you're still never far from being a parent. But yeah, that part of your life is always an interesting. So thank you so much, Ian, for being with us today. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Alice, and great to be with you all. It really is an honor and privilege to get to spend some time talking with you today, not only about this new book, Lives Lost and Leadership Found, Lessons from Special Somebodies, but also more broadly, the topic of leadership. As we get into the discussion, hopefully it will become apparent to you that the book is really a leadership book, but one that is all about being informed by loss. And I'll explain a little bit more about the connections to those two things as we get a bit deeper into the conversation. As Alice was alluding to, recognize we were doing this in webinar format, but we're going to do our best to try to make things as interactive as possible. So I'll be taking some pauses throughout to see if there are any questions or comments, and we'll do our best to address those as we move along at a fairly rapid pace. Now, in setting the stage for what I'm going to be discussing around the book and the approach that we took to writing this book, I'll also want to make sure that I do let you know that this has been a highly collaborative effort. So you might think of me as the lead author of the book, but as you'll hear throughout, There have been quite a few other contributing authors and various other perspectives, including many from a group that I co-founded almost 7 years ago now called the Consortium for Change, or C4C for short. We kind of run that organization with a philosophy of spirit of abundance, meaning we try to lift all the boats. There's plenty of opportunity for everybody out there, and we do our best to collaborate and share with one another. And also this friends for life philosophy that I like to live my life by, which is, now that we're connected to each other, if I can be of any kind of help to any of you in any way, please feel comfortable in reaching out. As part of putting the book together, one of the things that I was really quite obsessed about, if you will, was to make sure that the angles that we took and the perspectives that we included were way more than simply just Ian's view of the universe. So everything that I'm going to be going through, you might think of as having at least 200 voices, probably even closer, honestly, to 300 voices, which would be contributions from a variety of essay contributors, respondents to a survey that we did to collect some data, quite a few experts on neuroscience and neuroscience's connection to loss and to leadership, and even the special somebodies who became the subject matter of the many essays that were contributed for this book, who, even though they're no longer here with us, their voices and their wisdom actually, in fact, still are with us. So there are a lot of contributors to this book that go well beyond me. Basically, in putting the book together, we were trying to answer fundamentally three questions. The one question was a why question. So, why would you write this book in the first place? And I'll come back and address that in just a bit. Second thing would be a who question, fundamentally focused on who were these special somebodies who had a rather huge impact on the contributing authors and their perspectives on life and leadership. And then finally, more of a what question, which is the action question. For anybody who's a reader of the book, or even listening to a summary of the book, like we're going to be speaking about in our time together, it really becomes a question about, what are you going to do, as a result of some of the things that you may have picked up and learned from the book. So maybe to kick things off with some history and context, quite often people ask me the question, why did you decide to write this book in the first place? So let me explain a little bit about that. The story goes back actually a couple of years ago to 2023, when both my brother and my mother passed away about 6 months apart. And in my brother's case, he died at the age of 60 from metastatic cancer. It was a very sudden kind of situation where, from entering the hospital and diagnosis to death, was a relatively quick 8 days. And that was obviously very sudden, but fortunately, he didn't suffer for very long. In my mother's case, she was 93. As I'm fond of saying, she was fine right up until the time she wasn't. She was a relatively healthy 93-year-old. So obviously, we probably would all expect at that age that someone passing away would not be a huge surprise, but literally was fine until having some stomach issues, ending up going to the hospital. And about 5 or so hours later, she passed away from cardiac arrest as her system kind of shut down from all the shock. So, as sad and difficult as that experience was back in 2023, many of you, I'm sure, have also been through loss of loved ones. You also know that your brain is starting to try to deal with the loss, process what it means, and I was no exception to that. I pretty quickly found myself beginning to think about questions of, what did I learn from both my brother and my mother in life, and also in their death and the way that they died? And was there something, if you will, positive that might be able to be taken out of this, relatively negative experience. And then, of course, almost immediately began thinking about, well, Ian, you're not the only person on the planet who's ever experienced loss. I wonder what other people have been through and whether or not they are of the same mindset, which is, what can be learned about life and possibly even leadership from losing a loved one. So pretty quickly reached out to a wide variety of people in my network, found a lot of like-minded people who were interested in telling their story, but more importantly, the story of a lost loved one. And that is really how the book came together. So if you're wondering, in a nutshell, really, what is this book all about? It's a book about leadership, but it's informed by loss and emotion and a way of honoring lost loved ones. The way I would describe it is it's about life and leadership lessons that have been learned through the loss of various loved ones. And that's the approach that we have taken in pulling it together. Now, one of the things that we've also done as part of this process is to ask each of our contributing authors to share, in addition to the story about their lost loved one, three specific things that they have learned about life and leadership from their lost loved one, who might have been a parent or a grandparent or a spouse or a friend or a boss or a mentor or other people who've had some significant impact in our lives. And so in the case of my mother and brother, I actually went through this process as well and started thinking about of all of the things that I've learned from them about life and leadership, what really stood out for me. In my case, it was really three things: the importance of reality, the importance of advocacy, and the importance of caring. And, in the case of reality, it was really more about whether it's in your own life or in your role as a leader in the organization that you're part of, the importance of facing reality, understanding what's happening around you, and then dealing with it. Advocacy became important in terms of the willingness to stand up for and fight for not only yourself, but the people and the issues, the ideas, the ideals that you hold important, and advocating for those things, and on behalf of other people sometimes who may not be in a position to advocate for themselves. And then the third thing that really stuck with me, at least as related to lessons learned from my mother and brother, was the importance of telling people that you actually love, respect, care about them, appreciate them as human beings, and then showing them that, demonstrating that in your actions every day, rather than just your words. The other thing that really stood out for me as I was processing the loss of my brother and my mother was a concept that was introduced to me actually by my mother-in-law, my wife's mother, as I was going through this processing period, where she introduced an idea that she'd learned from others called the presence of absence. Where fundamentally the person you've lost is almost really always going to be with you, and you're kind of carrying them around on your shoulder or in the empty seat next to you. Yet there are constant reminders, that they're no longer there, and you can't turn to them necessarily for advice. And that has some rather huge impacts on us. So one of the things that I wanted to try to understand better as an underpinning for the book, if you will, was the idea of the connection, whether there was a connection between neuroscience, loss, and leadership. And of course, any of you have some experience in the neuroscience area, perhaps more so than I did when I started writing with this book. You'll recognize that there's a couple of fairly significant impacts on us as human beings, particularly brain and body, but also as it relates to leadership when you're dealing with loss. And what really got my attention was if you start to look at some of the brain and body impacts, things like blood pressure and heart rate and cortisol levels and memory and stress and brain fog. And perhaps the thing that really stood out for me, that really got my attention, is that if you do enough research in this area, what you recognize is that loved ones, their very existence is coded into our brains. And when we lose somebody very close to us, what begins to happen as part of the coping, grieving mechanisms that we all deal with through loss is that our brains begin to rewire. And that has a fairly significant impact on us both, mentally, emotionally, and I guess physically as well. The other thing that really came through loud and clear as I was pulling some of this research together for the book was the impact on leadership itself. And some of you may be familiar with the neuro leadership experts, David Rock and Jeffrey Schwartz. They have this concept that I think really applied extremely well to what we were learning in writing the book, which is that change is pain and focus is power. Now, those of us who work in organizations understand at the organizational level, we're dealing with change all the time. And many people would, in fact, say change actually is painful as we're dealing with it in our own organization. Well, of course, one of the most significant high impact changes that any of us can go through in our lives is the loss of someone who's close to and important to us. And that literally and figuratively does cause pain. The flip side of this coin, however, is that the ability to focus, compartmentalize, do things, multiple things at the same time while you're dealing with stress and the sense of loss that you might have experienced is power if you're able to harness it. But it left us with an interesting question that we, continue to explore throughout the book, which is, can somebody actually lead effectively when they're dealing with the pain of this kind of loss? So we started to gather lots of input from lots of different people with all of these sort of questions as an underpinning for the book. And one of the areas where we were able to bring a lot of voices to the table was through a brief survey that we did with lots of folks, some of whom we knew, many of whom we didn't know, fundamentally asking them the question around, what is the single most important thing that you may have learned from your own special somebody, a lost loved one, about life and leadership. And essentially, three themes emerged about cherishing relationships, the importance of advocating for yourself and others, which you heard me mention a few minutes ago, and this idea of what we ended up calling dream big and go bigger. So if you think about cherishing relationships, this is really all about the importance of being present, showing up for other people, demonstrating empathy, listening, caring, and really kind of came to the conclusion that the old adage of he or she who dies with the most toys wins really isn't the philosophy that people who are focused on cherishing relationships are all about. It's really he or she who dies with the most high quality, cherished, important relationships wins. And that came through over and over again in some of the lessons learned. A second chunk of feedback that we received was around the theme of this importance of advocacy and advocating not only for yourself, but also for other people. That means things like, be who you are and be okay with that and proud of that. Stand up for yourself, demonstrate authenticity in terms of what's important to you, what you value, and what you're willing to fight for and believe in. And at also the same time, advocating for other people and being a good role model for them. And then the third of the three biggest themes that emerged from some of the survey input was this idea of dreaming big but also going even bigger. So a lot of the themes here were about try, do, be, achieve anything, and believe that you actually can, and on the path to pursuing your passions and believing that you can achieve anything, you're inevitably going to encounter all kinds of obstacles and resistance and stumble along the way. And obviously, the resilience that's required to overcome those obstacles and the willingness to fail at times, but learn from that failure. So those are, I think, three pretty important themes that began to came out in the survey. Um, Perhaps even more importantly, the core of the book, as I would describe it, is 35 essays that were written by uh, more than 35 contributing authors. And as you might expect, even though the stories around all of these different special somebodies, as we called them, were very different, there were some patterns and themes that began to emerge from all of the different stories and the lessons learned. Now, one of the things that I think it's also important to kind of underscore here is if you were to go through and read the book, and I hope you do, you would discover that all of these stories are about people who, for all intents and purposes, we might describe as ordinary people who led ordinary lives and generally speaking died in fairly ordinary ways, even though their passing was, of course, uh, sad and had a big impact on our contributing authors and others in their family and friend and community circles. They were largely, ordinary people. But what was fascinating to me that came up throughout this pulling the book together was the realization that these people were absolutely extraordinary in their ability to have an influence and an impact on the people who were around them, including the contributing authors who wrote about them and honored them in terms of how they conducted their life and the kinds of leadership roles that they played, even though in most cases, you or I would probably not describe these people as leaders. And I think in many cases, the individuals who are being written about didn't really think of themselves as leaders either. They were simply just, living their lives and setting a good example for the people around them. Now, despite that, there were these themes that began to emerge, and you probably noticed at the top of the chart, this phrase, "the power of yet." Some of you may be familiar with Carol Dweck, the author of The Growth Mindset, who talks a lot about the power of yet. And the connection here is that you haven't met these people yet, until you read about them, but then you'll recognize that they're actually pretty special. And the things that really started to emerge in terms of the lessons learned about life and leadership clustered around primarily three categories of courage and compassion and curiosity. So let me talk about each one briefly, just to tease it out a little bit. On the theme of courage, which I think really pairs quite a bit with resilience, there are an awful lot of stories about the determination and the fearlessness that was required to overcome difficult circumstances, yet still press on, the willingness to push back against some very difficult things that people had to deal with, and also to bounce back, equally importantly, from some of the hardships and the difficult times that people may have experienced at various points in their life, yet still be able to demonstrate a ton of courage. A second thing that came up repeatedly around life and leadership lessons was the importance of compassion and the connection of compassion to building relationships. There was a lot of emphasis on things like assuming positive intent, being a great listener, being present, demonstrating, caring and concern for people, demonstrating a lot of respect for people and choices that they made along the way. And also, it's expressed in a number of different ways through some of these essays, the realization that people give and receive love in the best way they can. don't always know how to demonstrate that in perhaps the most effective ways, but they do it in the best way they can with the right intention. And then the final theme we'll emphasize for purposes of our conversation today is around curiosity and its connection to purpose. So think about this in terms of lots of advice around living life to the fullest, living a life of no regrets, following your passions and the things that really turn you on as a human being, and also the importance of intentionality in all that you do. And that theme of intentionality is going to come up again in just a second here. Jamie Anderson is an author. She has a really good way of approaching this, which I think applies quite well to the book that we put together, where she talks a lot about grief is just love with no place to go. And that really demonstrated itself multiple times, both in the survey inputs that we received, as well as in the essays that are included in the book, because for quite a few of the people who are contributing their perspective on their special somebody, it was actually giving them the opportunity to have that love that they have for that person and the respect that they had for that person, a place to go and expressing themselves along the way. So I think what we'll do for just a second here is we'll take a quick pause. I want to make sure if anybody has a question or a comment about anything that I've said so far, now's an opportunity for us to do that. Alice will help me check the chat box to see if there's anything there that I should respond to. And if not, we'll move along. But I do want to give you an opportunity to ask a question and or offer a perspective, including, if you might think about it, putting something short into the chat box, a word or a phrase that might represent what you might have learned from a special somebody who you've lost, or even if you're fortunate enough not to have lost somebody very close to you at this point in your life, somebody who's still living, but who might have a rather substantial influence on you. A word or a phrase that might capture something that you've learned from them would be great as well. So, Alice, I'm not sure. I don't see anything in chat yet, but perhaps you do.
Yeah, I was going to say, I do not, we do have some new people who have logged on. So please, as a general announcement, make sure that if you do have anything that you want to ask Ian or any comments or questions, please put them in the chat box as we go along. And as he is doing, we will definitely observe those and talk about them as they come up. So if anybody does have anything they want to say, please jump in there. I know that I am feverishly writing over here because I really, the thing, I've shared with you, I lost my mom suddenly in 2019, and the words change is pain and focus is power is an interesting, that is a great quote. And so I've written that down. So I do, but oh, yeah, Marion says courage is one word that comes to mind as I think about my loved one for sure. So.
Yeah, thanks, Marion. And I'm sure many of you have seen this expression in the past, but it's one that really resonates with me, which is, courage is not the absence of fear, it's the willingness to take action despite the fear. And certainly from many of the folks that were written about in this book, you wouldn't have described them as, heroic in the sense of, doing courageous things. But many of them actually did, in just the simple living of their lives and some of the obstacles that they had to overcome. And Jim, I really appreciate the comment you just put in here about understanding, where the individual is and where they're coming from, rather than thinking about it from our own sometimes selfish or narrow perspective. That actually did come up a number of times in our book as well. So I appreciate you sharing that as well. So thank you. And as things go along here, I continue on with the summary of the book and some of its themes, please feel free to use chat and either put a question in there, or we'll stop and pause and address it, and or if some thought comes to you about a special somebody who you've lost who may have inspired your thinking on the topic, to capture that as well, because I think others might benefit from it. But maybe I think we'll continue on just to build out a concept that I alluded to very briefly a minute ago, but really became an extremely important underpinning of the book. It's kind of think of it as an essential common denominator, if you will, for how do you go through loss and sometimes figure out a way, despite the loss, to turn it into leadership. It was very, very clear to me that many of the people who contributed for this book, either essays or even the survey inputs, somehow managed to take a very negative experience, yet turn it into something positive in terms of learning and value. You might think of it as that old way of talking about this topic of taking lemons and turning them into lemonade. That seemed to be really important to a lot of people. There's a social media personality named Giselle Ibarra who has kind of an interesting way of describing this that resonated with me as I was writing the book, which is she says life is a paradox. In order to heal, you must hurt. And one thing that was really loud and clear to me is that there are a series of paradoxes, competing priorities, or as I referred to them in the book, tensions that are really all about um, intentionality, realizing that you're going to be feeling and experiencing a bunch of hurt and certainly a fairly high degree of pain in loss. Yet part of the healing process requires coming out the other side, with a more positive way of processing and thinking about some of those hurts. And so I'm not going to go through every one of these. There are 7 of them that we talk about in the book, but let me just pick a couple of them to illustrate the point and the importance of being intentional about your thought process. So one that really resonated pretty strongly for me as I lost my brother in particular, and then my mother a couple of years ago, was this idea of fog. Most people say, I mentioned it when we were talking about the neuroscience of all of this, that fog is one of the almost inevitable outcomes of dealing with and processing loss, which has the impact of causing us to think and act less clearly than we might ordinarily do under less stressful and difficult circumstances. It's actually one of the reasons why a lot of people who are experts in grief will advise, do not make any important life or financial decisions for at least 3, 6 months, sometimes even 12 months following a significant loss, because whether you recognize it or not, are dealing with some fairly substantial elements of fog. And even in my own case, you remembering back to my story about my loss of my mother and brother, both of them were living in Atlanta at the time, and I live in the New York area on the east end of Long Island. So when I got the word from my mother that my brother had gone into the hospital, at first thinking that he was having a stroke, not yet realizing that he had, all these tumors throughout his body, including in his brain, that were causing the stroke-like symptoms. I had to move quickly, or tried to move as quickly as I could, to fly to Atlanta. And literally to this day, I cannot remember driving to the airport, going through the airport, flying on the plane. The next memory I really have is of picking up my mother and seeing her later that evening after as office or visiting hours had ended at the hospital. So there was quite a few hours that went by, or hopefully I wasn't doing anything, too crazy, but I don't really remember honestly most of that time. And if you talk to people who've experienced loss, particularly sudden loss, they will tell you all kinds of stories about fog and not really remembering certain aspects of what they were going through. Well, eventually you get to a place after you've processed things for a while of getting to greater clarity where you can start to think a little bit more clearly and rationally about the issues and the decisions, as well as the emotions and the feelings that you have about things. Another example that came up over and over and over again in the book and the stories, but also relates quite well to my own personal experience that I'll share here, is around compartmentalization. You know, people in dealing with the stress of loss, just as they're dealing with the challenges of leadership, oftentimes have this need to compartmentalize, where they're sort of taking the pain of the loss and the stress and the difficulty of what they're experiencing and putting it in a box, you know, kind of off to the side or back in the recesses of their mind or in their life so they can function and deal at the same time with other life priorities such as family needs, work needs, and other needs. Yet, you know, most human beings can only compartmentalize at that level for, you know, a relatively short period of time until they have to begin to, you know, integrate back into their lives all of the different thinking, feeling, and acting that they're doing in order to live their lives, go to work successfully, take care of their families successfully, and achieve all of the other things that they're responsible for achieving, despite the loss that they're going through. And probably the single most important takeaway from all of these different tensions of intentionality that I picked up was that adage that we often hear about time heals all wounds. I really don't believe that. What I believe is intentionality heals all wounds, and time is a contributor to healing all wounds. So yes, it's true that, you know, working our way through grief or loss over an extended period of time will help us process the loss, but only effectively if we're intentional in terms of our thought process and the actions that we're willing to take in terms of dealing with some of these elements of grief and fear and the fog and the paralysis and the compartmentalization and some of the nostalgia that we feel for, you know, looking back in history and remembering the person and the things that we used to do with that person and some of the learning that comes from it. So if any of this is resonating with you in terms of loss that you may have experienced recently or even a long time ago, please recognize that one of the better ways that at least I've experienced here to process the loss is to be very intentional about recognizing that you're dealing with some of these feelings and then actually, you know, be okay with taking the time to work your way through it. Now, it also occurred to me that there was perhaps a useful analogy in all of this around, you know, making a smoothie. Now, think about, you know, those of you who've had a smoothie in your life, you may not recognize that, you know, smoothies are a $12 billion global industry expected to grow to about $30 billion in sales by the year 2032. So this is a pretty big business and industry that we're referring to. And you know, look about it, think about it from all the perspectives of, you know, putting a smoothie together and the chopping and the slicing and the dicing and the smashing and the crashing and the bashing, you know, that it usually takes to, you know, bring a smoothie together and all the different ingredients, you know, many of which have to be blended together, seemingly incongruous things in a smoothie that all get thrown into a blender, the noise that's associated with that, you know, literally hearing the, you know, the whirring of the engine or the motor from the blender, and then all of a sudden it stops and there's silence. And then, you know, we crank it back up again, you know, and then all of a sudden it stops. And we're doing all of this with a certain amount of, you know, intentionality, to use that word again, as we're putting our smoothie project together. And it turns out that's very consistent with, you know, what we are experiencing when we lose a loved one and then try to figure out, you know, what, if anything, do we actually learn about life or about leadership from this person that we lost. And, it turns out, the ingredients, not only to make a smoothie, but also to make our lives, are really all about, surrounding yourself with the best kind of products or the best kind of people, and the influence that they have on us, blending together a variety of different disparate ways of ideas, but also these conflicting emotions, these tensions of intentionality that we have to work our way through in order to process the loss. Most people who've lost somebody important to them will tell you that their brain is constantly alternating back and forth between, feeling, noise and all these different conflicting thoughts and emotions in their head, and they can't really kind of get away from it. And then all of a sudden they're sitting there at night in the dark, perhaps trying to go to sleep, or they're by themselves and all their family members have left after the passing of this person. And suddenly the what was deafening noise becomes deafening silence. And I think there's a lot of analogies that I found as I was reading about and editing these stories from our contributing authors that reminded me a lot, of a smoothie. Now, most books, I'm a firm believer that, if you're going to write one, you hopefully are able to teach people something, that they may not have, known previously. And I hope this book does that. But I'm also a firm believer that if you're an author of a book, you should actually learn something. And there's a ton of things that I learned along the way in being the lead off author of this book. So the approach that I took as we got toward the end of the book was, rather than telling, you, the reader, what you should do as a result of this book, I was focusing more on, what did I learn and what am I going to do? And some of the things that, I took away are represented here on this chart. I'll just mention a couple of them, now for our purposes. So even though I've always considered myself to be somebody who is a realist and has focused on defining and confronting reality pretty regularly, I want to double and triple down on that, because human beings have this almost unlimited capacity to deny, deflect, and dismiss, facts or data that do not reinforce their preferred view of the internal or the external environment, and therefore allowing reality to seep in so that you can then deal with it, is really an important one for me. A second one for me that's really important is listen and empathize. I've always considered myself to be a good listener. Other people who know me tell me I'm a good listener, but you really never know what other people are carrying around with you, with them, I should say. And I learned that from this book. So the ability to understand that other people are carrying baggage and carrying some emotions and carrying difficulties from loss or from something that they might be going through at home, outside of the work environment, and being empathetic to that. That's something that I also need to and want to double and triple down on. So an important realization for me as the book was, coming to its final form was, what's my take on all this? I concluded that, I don't really fear death, although I'm sure we all do to a certain degree. Probably my greater fear is not living and leading to the fullest, and getting the most out of life and contributing the most out of life. And one of the questions I would ask each of you who are listening in, is how about you? What do you believe, and how are you going to follow up on those beliefs? Now, a couple of things that I've heard, from people that maybe make this book a little bit unique, is there's also a link in the book to a song that I wrote called Here and Gone. It's kind of dedicated to not only my mother and brother, who passed away in 2023, as I mentioned, but also to my father, who passed away over 50 years ago. And the song kind of starts out with, you were here and now you're gone, left the world in a hurry. I'm still here, but not alone. We're feeling strong, so don't worry. Now, if you want to hear me sing that or play that, well, you're probably crazy, but there is a link which you can go to in the book, but also separate from the book if you're interested in hearing the song and the lyrics. Hopefully, there'll be something in there that may resonate a little bit for you personally, but you'll probably also recognize why I've had a 43-year career in HR and leadership and not music. Now, one of the last things that I want to emphasize as we begin to wrap things up here, and we'll see if there's any questions as we put the finishing touches on this, is to let you know there's actually a section in the book at the very end that wasn't supposed to be there, which is encouraging the reader to actually write their own essay about their own special somebody and try to think about it in the context of life and leadership lessons that you may have learned from that person. The reason why this was, why I put it into the book, even though it was not anticipated, was hearing all the feedback from the contributing authors about the level of catharsis that they felt, the emotional release, the excitement in a way about being able to honor a lost loved one from writing about them. And so if you find yourself to be somebody who's not planning on writing a book or isn't even interested in contributing something that everyone else might read, even if you chose to write it for yourself or your family members and shared it with them, I think what you might find is the opportunity to get some emotional release, some catharsis from that experience, and of course, the opportunity to honor that person. And I'll also just let you know that in January, we're going to be announcing a essay awards process where we're going to be encouraging people as they read the book to then in turn write an essay, submit it to us, and we'll be actually giving away some prizes as a way of encouraging people to take that action, that difficult action of writing an essay about a lost loved one. So as we come to conclusion here, you might also be asking yourself the question, is there something I can do to contribute to this process going forward? If it resonates with you, obviously, purchasing the book for some others who are important to you, or doing some reviews, or writing about the book on social media, or if you happen to be connected with organizations or opportunities for us to speak about the book like I've done today, or to become a podcast host as an example. Those are also ways that you can help us kind of keep this movement going. And you see the QR code there to the right-hand side of the chart. That'll also take you to the link that will tell you a little bit more about some of these different ways that you might be able to either contribute or be part of our effort going forward. So let me just pause here for 1 second. We'll see one more time if there are any questions or comments that anybody wants me to address, and then we'll wrap things up and we'll hand it back to Alice. Just give everybody a second here to see if you have something that you wanted to ask about. And I'm not seeing anything now.
Ian, we can read some of the comments that are in there for sure, and you can see the one that is in there that says, "This is a great wisdom and very helpful. My mom passed away somewhat suddenly less than 2 months ago. We then quickly saw that Dad's dementia was much worse than we realized. Last week we helped him more from assisted living to memory care. It's all been a bit overwhelming and all consuming, which is new to me because I've pretty much always been able to overcome and persevere with life's challenges. These huge matters of the heart are just so different than matters of the mind or business, and it's really challenging to me. Thank you for these perspectives, very healing." So and it was, as I've mentioned to you as well, in terms of losing someone, and it is interesting to hear you say, the part about time heal, the part people say, time heals all wounds. And I loved your perspective that that's not necessarily true, because I do think it makes it not a constant fog, as you've, in some of those, the things on the charts that you mentioned, everything on the if I'm looking at it on the left side is definitely what you go through, and you can get to the right side for sure. But of course, during the holidays and any special times, and it kind of creeps up on you when you don't know it. But it is true also about, you never know what other people are going through or have been going through. So when somebody says, "You don't know what I'm dealing with," and you go, "Yeah, I do," because I have been through this, and I have unfortunately I'm a late in life child to my parents, and so I've unfortunately had to go through a lot of death in my family just because simply of age of me being so much younger, and my parents were so much older when they had me. So anyway, it's some of those nuggets that are very interesting is true for sure. So if
Yeah.
anybody else has anything to share in the comment or chat, that'd be great, helpful too. But yeah, I do really appreciate your information, and I appreciate the having the QR code and copy to the book for sure too.
Thanks for the comments, Alice, and for the perspective that was shared in chat. I think maybe there's 2 points I'll leave everybody with as we wrap up. One is that quite often when you're experiencing loss, you feel very much alone. But of course, what I realized from writing this book was there's an entire universe of people who've gone through very similar experiences. The second thing is that, while it's true that time might help heal wounds, time simply spent, feeling sorry for ourselves or wallowing in the loss, even though some of that's appropriate because we all, have to deal with the emotions and the sadness that usually comes from loss and the grief that always accompanies it. That's not enough to process and come out the other side, especially if you're trying to also at the same time demonstrate leadership for yourself, leadership for the organization you might work in, leadership for your family and friends. Usually we have to be a little bit more proactive and intentional, to use that word one final time, in thinking through what does this all mean to us. And probably the best thing that came out of this book, from my selfish perspective, if I can be selfish here for a second, is that you learn from every experience, good and bad. So loss for sure is a bad experience, but there's something to be learned from going through it and from the people or persons that you've lost along the way. I found that to be a very constructive way of viewing my brother and my mother's death, and even my father's, many years prior, was thinking about it in the context of what did I learn from them? And could I, in fact, share some of what I learned with other people who might benefit from it? That is the fundamental premise on which this book was founded. So I thank you all for your interest and attention. And you can reach me through the link that's at the bottom of this chart, but also find me on LinkedIn, where I'm pretty active, or my email address is iziskin at exexgroup.com. And I look forward to staying in touch with friends for life. Alice, back to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Ian. We so appreciate all your insight, and sorry for your loss. Even like you said, even with your dad, it never it always creeps up on us when we least expect it. So thank you so much for your perspective, and we'll certainly include your link to the book as well in our follow up. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today on our Wednesday webinar series. A little information about who we are. Talent Connections is a human resources executive search and consulting firm that is located in Atlanta. We were founded in 1999, and we've spent over 2 decades perfecting our craft in HR services while creating thousands of transformative connections. To find out more about us, you can visit our website at talentconnections.net. Our sister company, Career Spa, provides career transition and coaching services tailored to each individual, helping you discover your career path and secure an advantage in this ever evolving job market. So that website is careerspa.net for more information. The activity code that has been approved for our one professional development credit for recertification through SHRM is on the screen. It is 25-GQC3A. So make sure that you note that activity ID number on your recertification application form. And please remember to mark your calendars for our next Wednesday webinar, which will be Wednesday, January 21st of 2026. Our first kickoff as we start will be January 21st of 2026. So thank you so much, Ian. Again, we really appreciate it. We really appreciate everyone who was able to join. We do have one comment. It says, "Thank you so much for your presentation. I often think about my loved ones' leadership as an advocate when I'm faced with certain professional and personal situations. Their courage and bravery push me to keep going and take bold steps." Thank you so much for that insight and those closing words, Marion. We really appreciate it and really appreciate everyone being on our webinar today. Have a good holiday season. Bye-bye.